it's a collection of all original music, but it certainly fooled me. These songs sound like they're from another era. They have such a knack for writing new songs that sound like traditional numbers. Here's Whistle Won't Blow from the Downhill Strugglers.
Hi, this is Viv.
And Riley.
And you're listening to Radio Bristol.
Birthplace at Country Music Museum, this is WBCM LP Bristol.
Welcome into the second hour of the Old Time Jam. I'm your host, Brad Kolodner. Always great to be with you as we're featuring the latest in old time string band music. We heard from Dan Gellert, such groovy playing there on the classic I'll Roll in My Sweet Baby's Arms. That's Henry Barnes featuring Dan Gellert and Deb Posey with Sugarfoot Rag. And the Downhill Strugglers starting off the set from their new album with an original, Whistle Won't Blow. In this second hour of the program, we'll be hearing from Megan Lynch Chowning and Adam Hurt, new music from Rakish, also Tall Poppy String Band, and up next, here's an Ola Belle Reed song, performed like you've never heard it before. Kathy Fink and Marcy Marxer collaborating with the Chinese dulcimer player Chow Tien. Here's High on a Mountain.
Wind blowing free, thinking about the day
Hello? How's yours doing? Hello? Let me see. Okay. It wouldn't be an event without a technical difficulty.
No.
Yeah, we'll just pass back and forth if you're okay with that.
We could do that.
And give this to you and see if you can figure out what the issue is, and then in the meantime, we'll pass back and forth. Yeah, it can just be a battery.
That works.
Okay. Rewind. Start again. So hello, oh yeah, you can hear me now. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. I see quite a few new faces here tonight, which is always exciting. This is our monthly speaker sessions. We do these every month except in September normally, and I'm Renee Rogers. I'm the head curator here at the Birthplace of Country Music. My colleague Sam Parker is in the back helping with tech. But we're really excited to host Cam Collins here tonight. I've known Cam for a very long time, actually. I knew you when I worked at Believe in Bristol, in fact. But she will be talking to us about her award-winning horror podcast, which is a perfect fit for spooky season. But before we get started, I just have a few little housekeeping details to share with you. If you need to go to the restroom, they are just down the hallway and to the left. Feel free to do that at any time. We are not in school. So, the museum will be locked in about 15 minutes, so the doors that you came in will be locked in about 15 minutes. So be sure, if you do need to leave early, to please exit out the doors just outside the performance theater. That way you won't leave the doors unlocked for anyone to walk in. We will have a question and answer session with Cam after our conversation. If you are on YouTube with us, you can put your question into the chat. A survey will be sent out afterwards. Please take a few minutes to fill that out because it really helps us to plan for next year's speaker sessions and hear what we should be doing better or what we're doing great. And finally, tonight we usually put the donation jar out. It is just there to the side to support museum programming, but tonight any monetary donations that we take in tonight will actually be going towards Hurricane Helene relief in our region. Thank you. We have seen a real outpouring in our community. We're seeing it every night on social media and every day in the news, but we are very proud of our immediate community. If you go into our learning center, it is filled with things that people have brought in of food and non-perishables and all sorts of things that are needed that are going to be going off into communities tomorrow. But tonight we thought we would do monetary donations because this is a marathon and not a sprint. So there will be a lot of need down the line. So if you want to put a donation in there, all of that money will be, we'll just write a check that goes off to a local vetted organization who is doing that type of work. So let me introduce our speaker tonight, Cam Collins. I think because most of you are fans, you probably feel like you know her very well already, but I will give you her bio, which is that she is a native of Wise, Virginia, where she cut her teeth on the creepy folklore of the region. A lover of all things that go bump in the night and a dyed-in-the-wool spooky witch, Cam also produced and co-hosted Appalachian Arcana, a podcast featuring regional stories of folklore, true crime, cryptids, and other general weirdness. I think we can all get on board with those things. Before Old Gods of Appalachia took off, she provided graphic design and web development for numerous businesses in the Tri-Cities and beyond. She holds degrees in English from the University of Virginia at Wise and communications from the University of Georgia. Welcome, Cam. We're really glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Renee. And thanks all of you for coming out tonight. It's really great to see so many faces here, and I hope we have lots of folks joining us via YouTube as well. I know we've definitely had some of the fans comment that they would be tuning in, so that's really exciting.
Yes, and what's great about the YouTube is that it stays up there, so if you've missed tonight, people will be able to catch it there or catch it again, because it also goes up on our website, usually within a couple of weeks. And we now partner with Bristol, Tennessee Essential Services for it to go out on their television channel the month after it airs here, so that's great. I have to tell you, Cam, I get scared really easily. So it took me a while to listen to this podcast, because when I heard horror, I was like, oh no, I can't do it. But I started listening to it a few months back in anticipation of this, and I absolutely love it. And so far I haven't gotten too scared. But it took me a while because I was afraid that it would just stay there in my brain and I wouldn't be able to get it out. Yes. So obviously a lot of us are fans already, but for those who might not know as much about the podcast, tell us a little bit about Old Gods of Appalachia, its horror focus, and how it originated.
So, Old Gods of Appalachia is a horror anthology podcast. It is narrative fiction. And by anthology, what we mean is that some of the stories are standalone stories. Others are connected in various ways, whether they feature the same characters or there'll be an arc. A lot of times in a season of the podcast, we'll do 4 or 5 arcs. So we'll have 3 to 5 episodes that are one connected storyline, and then we'll jump to something else. And the next storyline sometimes is connected to the previous, sometimes not. Sometimes you don't figure out how they're connected until the very end of the season. And that's kind of, how we tell our stories. They're all set in our region. And we are not a folklore podcast, which is sometimes a misconception. But we do sometimes we are influenced by, and we borrow from the folklore of the region. So there are some creepy crawlies that you might actually recognize. Skint Tom is, in fact, like a regional legend. Things like that. Others we've completely made up out of whole cloth. The Witch Queen, that's just our creation. Hornet Head, just our creation. And so we mix it up a bit, but it is, even when we borrow, it is original fiction that I and my partner Steve Shell create, and he narrates.
He does a great job about the narration too, and we're going to come back to that because that's something that makes the podcast really unique. But thinking about, you had this other podcast before that was also about stories, but true crime, all sorts of things. Have you always been a storyteller, and were stories important within your community or within your families? How did you come to feel like this was a way to express yourself?
Yes, I've always been, interested in writing for a long time. When I was in, I think it was first grade, in school, we could purchase, the school had, a little shop where you could buy pencils, pens, cute erasers, that kind of thing. And one of the things they had were these blank books. And when I say a blank book, it's not like what you might go today and buy at Barnes & Noble. It was fully blank. The covers were blank. So you could write or draw on all the pages. You could illustrate your own cover. And so it was like a great thing, to encourage the creativity of kids. And it always appealed to me because I love to read. My mom loves to tell the story that she didn't know I could read because I learned to read because I made her read to me so much, and I would follow along in the books. And I went to school and got to kindergarten, and they're like, did you teach her to read? And she's like, I don't know what. She knows how to read. And they're like, yeah, she knows how to read. And basically I kind of hoped she wouldn't catch on so that, so she'd keep reading to me at night. always a sneaky kid. I've always wanted to tell stories and been interested in telling stories. my dad was a huge reader, so he was a big influence on me as well. And I always loved any kind of storytelling event that they would have at school. Loved to hear ghost stories and campfire tales, like from way back. I've always loved that kind of thing. So yeah, like it's always been something that's really important to me. And of course, like so many of us in the area, you grew up hearing Jack tales. You grow up with the Foxfire books and all those things that, just really fire your imagination from a young age.
Were you into horror when you were little? Or is that a new thing?
Oh, yeah, I was definitely a Goosebumps kid. I love me some R.L. Stein. Like I've always, is it a ghost? If it's ghost stories and like any kind of campfire stories book, anything like that. Like I've just always loved. I love Scooby Doo. Okay, even though we all knew they weren't real ghosts, it was still like I've always loved that.
So you mentioned your partner's narration of the podcast, and that is one of the things that really struck me when I first started listening to it. Is that he has a very distinctive voice, and he really uses his voice well, I will say. And it's something I particularly like about it, because there's this air of familiarity with the way he speaks, the word choices that you all have written into that narration, the tone of voice. It's a feeling of being all together, those use of the word family and fellowship hall, those types of things. So how did you all develop that voice in that format?
Oh gosh, it was really just a process of, let's see. So the first episode, the prologue, we you can hear it from the very beginning, and Steve was working on that, and we had talked about working on a project together. Well, we talked about coming up with something to write together for decades, and nothing ever quite stuck. And then he, came up with the idea for this, which the podcast you hear is definitely not what we originally discussed. It evolved over time. Originally, that we were going to have like several writers, and each of us would kind of like tackle a different story that was, at the time we're thinking, inspired by things like natural disasters, mine incidents, that sort of thing. And over time, various people everyone else dropped out of the project. I had a lot of things going on in my personal life at the time that made it really difficult for me to concentrate. But Steve was polishing and working on this prologue for so long. I finally was like, we're going to do this. We're going to drop it. We're going to release it. You can't just keep twiddling with it forever. You can't. You've got to just let the baby out in the world. Okay, it's time. And I'm like, and I'm ready to jump in, because he was already working on the next couple of episodes, and he said, well, this is it. Like, I feel like this is all it's going to be. This is what I'm going to do. And what else is there to do? And I said, well, let me have the church. And he said, what, the church? It's a set piece. It's backdrop, whatever. I'm like, well, somebody had to bury those bodies. And that was the beginning of this. But in terms of the voice, that was present in the very first piece that he was sharing with me. And it really fired my imagination. And we started working on developing the other stories. And just like, yes, a lot of it is, we both listen to a lot of podcasts, and we never heard voices that sounded like ours. Like at the time, a lot of podcasters were on the West Coast, so you have a lot of that accent, with like the vocal fry and things like that, which I'm not dissing. Y'all talk however you want to talk; it's fine. But you hear that, or you hear somebody, they sound like they're from New York, and just, you didn't hear a lot of Southern voices, and certainly not voices that sounded like what we grew up with. And mind you, I realize that I sound different than the characters in the show, and Steve sounds different. If you talk to him in person, people are always surprised well, for one thing, they think because of the narrator's voice that he's older. He's an old man. He's a little old man. He's not. And like we've had people say that that the accent he uses is made up. It's like, no, that is a character. That is a character based on so many people that we grew up for, so many papas who, our own and our friends that we grew up sitting around listening to them tell stories, or, around the fire, the bonfire out back, like all the time. And so that's really, that's a lot of it is hearkening back to the storytelling that we heard growing up in our families and communities. And also that, that desire to hear voices that sound familiar to us. So that's I hope that answers the question.
It does. Though it makes me think a little bit differently about the question now, because I was thinking, because I listen to a lot of podcasts too, and I've listened, there's several podcasts that I've listened to from the beginning, some that I've come into, sort of midway because it doesn't matter, and others that I've listened to from the beginning. And often at the beginning of a podcast, that first season is patchy because people are finding their feet, they're finding their voice. Y'all's did not have a patchy stage, to my mind. It didn't sound like it to my mind. So there was a little bit of me that was thinking this is, not that it was an act, but that he had acting background. And so now the way you've described it, maybe the reason why it felt so familiar and right to me is because of it just being authentic. And not that I didn't think it was authentic, but do you know what I mean? I felt like he must have had some acting background because it was so well done from the beginning.
A little bit of acting, but not actually. It's from the other side. Steve taught everybody. A lot of people know from listening to the show that he was a teacher. And everybody guesses English teacher, and they guess correctly. But he was also a theater teacher and director. So he's actually got it from the other side. He is an experienced director, and also, little known fact, he's a radio guy. When we were in college, he was a local radio DJ, and so and that guy was also a character, But he has a great voice, and he knows how to use it, whether he's speaking with his own voice or creating a character. So yes, you're right. He does have acting experience.
and like you said, just that authenticity of hearing voices that you're used to hearing in your own day-to-day life, that makes a big difference to you in the connections. You mentioned that you do take some inspiration from events or stories or folklore from Appalachia, that it's all original fiction, but there is some inspirations. Can you tell us about a few of the things that have sort of played into that inspiration that has developed into the stories that you've told?
Sure. Well, one of everyone's favorites from last season is, of course, Taily Po. We took the legend of Taily Po and sort of expanded it and made him into this eldritch creature. Although in the show, and this is a bit of a spoiler, so I hope y'all are caught up. It's not much of a spoiler. So Taily Po sort of begins as, this sort of low creature that you might think is your typical the word is going, your typical booger, okay? There we go, your typical booger that, we've all heard the story of Taily Po. Taily Po, where's my Taily Po? We've all heard that. And he starts out that way, but what happens is he has an encounter with some of the beings that we created that makes him much more powerful and more scary. So there's Taily Po, there's Skint Tom, Old Green Eyes is also another legend that we borrowed from. And also, just in terms of local folklore, in terms of the granny magic and things like that, that's certainly been a huge inspiration, as I'm sure everyone is very well aware, because we have lots of witches in the show. Although, of course, we call them witches, but I don't think we only use the word witch occasionally in the show, because that is not what we often refer to today as granny witches. Those women would not refer to themselves as witches ever. So they might call themselves healers or something like that. So we've drawn a lot of inspiration from that. Trying to think. I know there's probably a lot of stuff that I'm forgetting, but and then what we've not done yet that I'm one of these days I will. I've always loved the cattywampus. That's one of my favorites. One of these days, you will have a cattywampus. Sooner or later, I'll get there. I promise.
There was definitely a reaction in the audience to that, so I think people will be excited. So you've been doing this. You're in your 4th season now. Is that correct? And which storyline have you most enjoyed writing, or even hearing from your partner? Which storyline have you enjoyed the most?
Actually, we've finished the 4th season. We are getting ready to start season 5. Let's see. Some favorites. I'm a big fan of anything with Jack. Jack is a strangely polarizing character. A character I thought everybody would love. Who doesn't love a trickster? He's so fun. But not everybody does enjoy a trickster, actually. Not everyone likes Jack. But I love Jack. I think Jack's a lot of fun. Skint Tom is another one of my favorites. In terms of writing, Lavinia is one of my creations. I love writing her. I love playing the character. I don't think anybody local. Did they? I'm trying to think. I don't think our local shows got Lavinia on the stage this year, unfortunately, which is really sad because we did something on tour this summer we thought we'd never do, which was bring Miss Lavinia to the stage. And boy, was that fun. That was great. Just an awesome time. I love the Underwoods, the characters of the Underwoods. I love their story. Door Under the Floor, which is a Lavinia one, that's one of my favorites. And of course, the Death Island story arc in season 2, which is people tell us often that it reminds them of Stephen King. It reminds them of Stand By Me. And that's not an accident. It is very much an homage to Stephen King, who's one of both Steve's and my favorite writers. And one of the things we admire most about him is the way that he depicts friendships. Because there are a lot of examples in The Body, which inspired Stand By Me, in the Dark Tower series. There's a lot of focus on the friendships between the characters, and that is one of the things that we appreciate most. So I think that's mostly a Steve joint. There's some of me in there too, but that was definitely kind of a storyline that came, that he conceived, that's inspired by his group of friends as kids, and it is one of my favorites as well.
Stephen King is probably one of the reasons I'm not good at horror. I read one of those books when I was probably too young to do so. So you mentioned several characters and the ones that you particularly have liked and the stories that you've liked writing. What do you hear from the fandom about their reaction to these characters and these stories? What are some of the things that you've heard from them about why they like them so much and which ones they like particularly?
Let's see. Everyone loves the Witch Queen. They're really caught, wrapped up in her story. She is a canonically Arrow Ace character. And I know that a lot of fans who are asexual as well really appreciate having representation and having a character that they can see here on screen, so to speak, that they can relate to. And so that's a big favorite. Everybody loves the Walker sisters. Feisty Marcy Walker and her sisters, and they're in the story of their strength and perseverance. Everybody loves those and finds them really inspiring. Glorian Boggs, who is a character from our Patreon series, but she did eventually make her way into the public season. Also, she's a big favorite, in part because of the amazing acting talents of Allison Mullins, who voices her character, and who's just straight up channeling her own grandmother in this woman. It's just like her, and she's very, again, like, there, people love the strong women in this series a lot. People like Jack because he's fun and he's funny. And let's see, what are some other favorites? We got a great reaction to Taily Poe. Everybody liked Taily Poe a lot. People like Skint Tom because he's funny. So yeah, there are a lot of popular characters. A Horned Head is scary, and everyone loves that. So, and the Underwood family, people are a big fan of the Underwood family, and just generally, like, I think a lot of it is, one of the things that we hear most from fans is actually harkens back to what I said before, which is we get a lot of fan emails and things from fans who have moved away from the area. And one of the things they love is hearing voices that sound like home. Like, they find it very comforting. That is one of the things we hear the most, is that if you've moved away, listening to this show is very comforting.
So I didn't pre-warn you about this question, but something you said made me want to ask it. You mentioned the Patreon, and tell me how much extra content folks get if they are members of the Patreon. Because hopefully, I mean, probably a lot of people here are members already, but what kind of extra content are they getting from that?
All right, at this point, I don't have a current count. I actually, for a legal thing, had to make a count of the extra hours of content that was on Patreon. And at that time, and this was probably almost 2 years ago now, we were looking at like 56 extra hours of content. So Patreon is really interesting because we've kind of switched up what we were doing. When we first started Patreon, what we did was, during the regular season, we offered day early and ad-free access to the regular season. And then between seasons, we would produce like a multi-episode arc that would be like in the summer months, if it happened to fall in the summer. And then particularly when we started to go on tour, we realized we can't do that because we spend our entire summer on the road. So the way we do it now is we still have Patreon series, but we're actually producing an extra episode that's posted every month for Patreon at a certain level, and everyone still gets ad-free early access and things like that. But there's quite a bit of content. The first Patreon series was Build Mama a Coffin, which is still a fan favorite, even though this was early on. This was right after season 1, and it's one of those things that we look back on, and we would edit. There were edits. There would be edits. It was 2020. It was a super stressful time. Like, we would like make some edits to this, but hey, people still love it. So great, awesome. We're not going to change it, and people will probably be upset if we did at this point. So there's Build Mama a Coffin. I believe the next series we did was just a 2-parter. Called The Door Under the Floor, which is actually a modern story set in 1992. That is it's not the first mention of Miss Lavinia, but it is the first time that she actually is a character that you hear speak and get to see interact with people in the story. And that is, it is more modern. It's definitely more of, Steve likes to say that a lot of what we do in the regular season, it tends to be, a lot of what he does is cozy horror. It's scary, but it's also got that, that sort of folksy, comforting vibe to it. And The Door Under the Floor is less like that. It's more, this is my slasher movie of a story. It's what it is. There's no happy ending. So that was the second one, which is still favorite of mine. There's Blackmouth Dog, which is actually not a continuation. It's actually a prequel to Build Mama Coffin, in which we meet a young Glory Ann and her friends and neighbors, and they have some adventures. Then we also have, I know I'm missing some things here. I'm sure I'm forgetting. There's some standalone stories, especially more recently. We've started posting some standalone stories. We now have Familiar and Beloved, which is a series that actually focuses somewhat on the beloved animal characters from the series, such as Sam the dog. There's another fan favorite. Everybody loves Sam the dog. So there's one that features Sam the dog, and you get Sam kind of gets to be hero. You get some of his perspective as a dog, but it's actually a follow-up to, well, what happened later to the boys of Death Island. So you get more of their story in that piece. There's and then there will be, let's see, there's another one, and it's a cat. Oh, right, yes, there's one that features Emmeline, Miss Emmeline, the cat. She is the Boggs family cat, a very special cat. That's the second part of that, and then and those are each like 5 episodes. And then we have 2 more arcs in that are currently planned. There might be more. I don't know. And those will feature Vespertilio, who is Marcy Walker's cat, and a dog friend that you haven't met yet. So, and then additionally, there's some standalone stories, and there are also some studio recordings of some of the stories that we featured in various locations on our tour. So you get some of that as well. Some stories that, unless you've been to the tour and you've been to that specific date, you might not have experienced, because our shorter pieces that we have on tour, like we usually have a short story that's maybe 20 minutes long before the hour-long main story. And those short pieces make for some really good Patreon content when we record them. And because they vary depending on which actors are able to come with us to which dates, they're always different. So that's been fun. But there's quite a bit on Patreon at the moment. So there's a lot of extra stuff to dive into there.
Yeah, so a true fan definitely already knows that. But if you haven't dug deep into that, I would definitely recommend it. You mentioned about a story that was more set in modern times, and you do that. You range across historical periods from like the late to the 19th and early 20th centuries to more present-day stories set in 1970s to 1990s. And that's a huge span of time. So why did you all decide to sort of do it across that large time period? And are some of those stories, are you trying to still connect them across the decades or the centuries?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. We actually, the earliest time period we feature is in the 1700s. That's the very beginning of the Witch Queen's arc, because she is, the idea of her, and the reason you're never going to get this sort of like in-depth, episodes long storylines with her the way you do, say, with the Walker sisters, is the concept of her, the way we envision her, is she's a sort of a mythical figure. Like she really, she doesn't have a name. She does, but I don't even know it. Like, no, we will never reveal her name, because she's a legend. And so that's kind of the basis of her. Beyond that, I think we really wanted to kind of get at the roots go back to the beginnings of like some of the legends and folklore that we actually use in the story. And Yeah, because some of the things originally we were inspired by sort of using these historical events and things like that, and so that's kind of where we initially started, and it's been really popular. But we like to do that. We like to think about the history of the region, what's happened, and use that to inform the stories that we're writing and telling. And it's really interesting. It's interesting to kind of look at that history from a different perspective. Some of the things we do, we always say like, it's an alternate Appalachia. We might, flip some dates around. Somebody was very angry about kudzu. Because apparently kudzu wasn't introduced into the United States until, like the 60s, something like that, and we have kudzu. And our, it's like, look, it's an alternate Appalachia, all right? It's an alternate history. It is fiction as well. So, yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
I can certainly think of better reasons to be mad about kudzu than this. So going back to the theme of this being a horror podcast, one of the things I found really creepy is in the first season is the men who come who don't speak and just sort of do the bidding, but if you aren't exactly right in how you say it, it can end very, very badly. When they went and tore the houses apart to get the wood for the extra building, to me they were very creepy, just that sort of mindless obedience, but not having full control over how that might manifest, etc. As someone who's been steeped in horror, is there anything that's happened within the podcast that you found almost too creepy or scary or sort of shied away from a little bit?
Oh gosh. What's funny is a lot of times I write things and I don't really scare myself until I actually hear it performed. And then, like, I hear Steve reading the words in a creepy voice and with his soundscapes, and I'm like, oh, gee, that's kind of creepy there. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, gosh. Trying to think. In season 2, when we're dealing with the dead queen and the sort of like creatures that she brings into being from like the bones of dead animals and and weeds and sticks and all of that stuff. Those were very creepy. Particularly the rats. We haven't done a lot with spiders. Sooner or later, he's going to get me, though, because I'm really afraid of spiders. I just know he's waiting. He's biding his time. He's absolutely going to get me sooner or later with the spiders. I guarantee it. What else? Okay, so you can probably guess. One of the things about the show is you can guess what we're scared of, all right? Creepy babies, creepy children. Very, very scary. Very scary. So that's a thing that shows up in the show because it's a thing that scares us. And Steve is a little bit afraid of dogs. Yep, he was bitten by a dog as a kid, and so he's a little bit like he likes dogs, but he's a little I don't know, particularly about like big dogs. So that's why the series tends to focus has quite a few monsters that appear as big dogs. So those are some of the things that scare us.
Dealing with those childhood traumas through writing and creativity. He would probably not like my dog. She is a big dog. Yes. You also, you talked about that in the fandom, you have lots of folks who have moved away from the area who appreciate the podcast because it brings them this feeling of home and reminds them of some of the stories and storytelling that they've experienced in their past. So I'm going to count them sort of as part of Appalachia, but it's reaching beyond this area. This is not just a local podcast or even a regional podcast. This is a very global podcast that's award-winning across those ways. So how has it reached beyond Appalachia? And then what, well, go ahead and answer that first, and then I'll come to the second part of the question, just how it's reaching beyond Appalachia.
Well, I mean, because it's a podcast and it's available on pretty much any podcast network you can think of, it's free, like, to listen to. Anyone can listen, and it certainly has spread. I'd have to look. I haven't looked recently at our statistics for just like the regular public podcast feed, but I know where we have shipped Patreon rewards, because we have, at certain tiers you get like a little care package, and we have shipped them all over the world. All over the world. We have shipped things to Australia. We have shipped things to Japan. We have shipped things to the Middle East and, various parts of Africa. We have shipped everywhere. It's kind of crazy. We've shipped to a lot of service members stationed all over the world. That's, I think, a big thing is shipping to those folks who are away from home. And it's pretty far-reaching. It's wild. When we did our first very small series of live performances back in 2022, we performed in Asheville a couple of shows, and Big Stone Gap at Union High School. That was a sold-out show, over 700 people, standing room only, and there were people who traveled from 5 different countries. One of them flew over from England. There were some from Canada. There was a girl who flew in from Alaska, which is quite a trek to come to the shows. So it was pretty crazy. Yeah, so we're forevermore just blown away by how far the show has spread and how many people it's reached. It's kind of crazy.
And with that spread, so beyond Appalachia, do you see an impact on how it's influenced people's perceptions or their understanding of where we come from, or wanting to know more about Appalachia? Has it opened up those observations and questions, do you think?
I think so. That's certainly the impression we get from, talking to fans and interacting with them online and at the shows. And I certainly hope so, because that is, one of our goals. I mean, obviously we're creating art and we want people to enjoy it, and that is like the prime directive. But we really want people to listen to our show and hear our stories and have a better understanding of Appalachia, and understand that this place is not just full of meth heads and poverty, that we have a rich culture of arts and music, and there's a lot here. And Steve and we have never shied away from addressing in our stories the darker aspects of living here. We haven't really reached into talking about the opioid crisis at this time. But, I mean, we talked about the fact that, hey, yes, the region we write about, this is the South. There was slavery. There, is racism. And we do try to address those things. We tackle them head on. We're not trying to sugarcoat Appalachia by any means. There's certainly the destruction caused by strip mining and things like that. There's the things that happened with union busting and all of that when miners were trying to organize. And we don't shy away from any of that, but we also do our best to portray the really positive aspects of living here. The fact that this is a place where community is important, where people look after each other, and, you know, by and large have really good hearts. And, you know, we try to give, basically we want people to understand that Appalachia is like anywhere else, where we've got, you know, it's got its problems, but it also has a lot to offer as well, and a lot of good people here, just like anywhere else. And so, yeah, like we hope we can overcome some of the stereotypes.
Yeah, and certainly art in all its forms, music, storytelling, visual arts, is a great way to get people to look beyond the stereotypes and think more deeply about the place. So it's great that you've gotten this audience that's getting a different perspective. So we're coming to the end of my questions, and I have one final one for you before we open it up to the audience. What can we expect next from Old Gods, and is there anything even newer than Old Gods on the horizon?
We don't have a spin-off as yet. Let's see. The next thing that we're really focused on that I can tell you about is season 5. And season 5 is going to be a little bit of a departure in some ways. We will be getting back to more of an anthology format where we've got, you know, 4 or 5 story arcs in the season, with less of a through line that kind of neatly ties together at the end. At least that's what we're planning right now. I'm when the muse calls. Sometimes we plan and things take a turn that we didn't expect. That happens a lot, actually. But it certainly will not have the sort of very obvious organizing structure that you had last season with the trial of Jack. So it will be different. And we're definitely going to do more of the skipping around. I can, it's not too big a spoiler to say that we will be doing more of the skipping around in history next season. So if you enjoy that, if you like the focus on different time periods, you're definitely going to get enough of that. What else? Is there anything else I could say? I don't think there's a lot that I'm allowed to announce at this time. I can't, but I guess I can tell you, if you are a fan of our collaborations with Sucre Bay, we've collaborated with them to do a couple of perfumes. We will be announcing a new collab very, very soon, so you can look forward to that. And we do have, there's some other so yeah, keep an eye on your feed, because we do have some important announcements coming very soon that I just can't talk about yet.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Kim. It's been great having you here. A horror podcast is definitely the best subject for an October speaker sessions. And let's really quickly give a big thank you to Cam and to Old Gods of Appalachia. And I'm going to open it up. I would ask that if you have a question, to wait to get the microphone so that our YouTubers can hear what's going on.
Hey, you said that some of your episodes are influenced and inspired by local Appalachian folklore. So what are some of your favorite traditional Appalachian folk tales, and why?
Put me on the spot here. I have to dig through the memory. Cattywampus is definitely a favorite, big favorite of that. Anything involving ghosts, any ghost stories, things. I love ghost stories. Fun fact: if you're on Patreon and you're familiar with the character of Granny White, one of her epithets is she is the hungry mother. And if you are from this, very, very local area, you know that we have, that very near to us is Hungry Mother State Park in Marion, Virginia. And so this park is actually named after one of those legends, the legend of the Hungry Mother, which involves, she's sort of a ghost. She like Native Americans attacked a settler village and killed everyone, and she's the ghost of a mother who's, looking for her murdered children or something like that. And that's a very cringe legend, in retrospect. So but we love that the Hungry Mother, and so we're like, well, what could we do with that? What could we do? What sort of Hungry Mother could we make that is not kind of racist but still very creepy, and that's what we came up with this. We wrote this character, and then Betsy Puckett brought her to life and made her more terrifying than we ever imagined with her hungry thing that she does. And you're like, ugh, she's terrifying. Thank you, Betsy. So those are a couple that I can think of just off of the top of my head. I do love Cattywampus. Did always like Taily Poe too. Geez. Is Raw? I don't think Rawhead and Rawbones. I think that like harkens all the way back to Europe. But of course, that is one of the folk tales that was still handed down by a lot of our ancestors. Rawhead and Bloody Bones, that kind of thing. That's always been, yeah. So I hope that's good.
I was going to ask you about Rawhead and Bloody Bones because that's the one that I got scared by my friend's father all through my childhood. So we have another question here.
So as a writer, you talked about how you get a lot of inspiration from like local events, and in this area, families can have very, very long memories, right? So some of the events that you might reference, like mine collapses, like the Saltville flood, all that stuff, right? There's still people whose families were affected by that. How do you do you keep that in mind when you're writing? How do you deal with that there were real people affected by something you're basing this on?
We do try our best to be respectful of that, and actually, it's one of the reasons why we haven't kept as much of a focus on our original concept of kind of flipping disasters on their heads. It's one of the reasons a lot of people have asked us why we haven't done like Matewan and things like that, and it's like that's something that's we know is close to a lot of people's hearts, and we just don't know if if it would be right to do that. It's kind of one of those. So we're kind of like, we have over time we've become a little more sensitive to those issues and trying to be certain that that we are respectful. That if something inspires us, we're not just directly using like the same names, the exact same circumstances and things like that. Because we don't, and certainly not the names of real people, unless they're bad people. Unless they are the villain of the piece and they deserve to be remembered badly. Zebulon Vance. Over time we've tried to be sensitive to that, and more over time it did occur to us hey, there are still people might not like that, and rightly so. So we do try to keep that in mind.
So first, thank you for having a huge platform and teaching people how to say Appalachia correctly. So my question, what are some of your favorite content, like horror content out there that's maybe not as mainstream as Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, whether it be movies like the VHS series or internet-based writing like the SCP Foundation?
Oh gosh, let's see. You see, if I had known this, I could have prepared myself better with like a list. I don't know if you recognize this. I'm a huge fan of Return of the Living Dead 3, which was kind of a direct to video piece from the 90s. That is a big favorite of mine. Let me see. What have I listened to recently? SCP is good. There's a new series coming out. What's it called? Shoot. I'm so bad at this. I'm so bad at remembering things like this on the spot. Let's see. Actually, I'll make a post. Can I make a post about this somewhere later? Because it's really hard to think on the spot, I swear. And honestly, in terms of podcasts, I listen to a lot of nonfiction. In my own spare time, I tend to just get to gravitate toward other things. But I watch a lot more movies and I read a ton of books. And I don't want to just whip out my phone, but I could. That would be it. It's whip out my phone and start digging through what have I read recently. Shoot, I will make a post about that. But particularly because you specifically asked about things that are less mainstream, I have to dig. Because the things that I've watched or read most recently have not been. They have been kind of mainstream. The thing that comes to mind immediately is Candyman, because that's one of my favorites. And that's the things that come to mind most easily are things I love Candyman. I'm getting a Candyman tattoo. And I liked both. I like the original, but I do like the new one as well. And I also just recently listened to here's a podcast recommendation. There's a podcast out right now that is, I think it's called Candyman, The True Story of the Bathroom Mirror Murder. And it's about a real-life event that happened in Chicago that it seems quite clear that Clive Barker and the makers of the film were inspired by. Because there's a woman living in the Chicago housing projects, and a dude people literally came into her home to rob her through the bathroom mirror. Because when they built this building, they built a pass-through between apartments set to make it easier for the maintenance staff to come in and work on the plumbing. Well, the problem is these things, you could just pop that mirror out and people where there was a series of break-ins and this lady got murdered. And it's really interesting. It is true crime rather than fiction, but it is really interesting. There are 2 episodes out. I can't wait for the next one. I'm really excited. So there's a recommendation.
Me again. So one of my favorite things about mythology, storytelling, folk tales in general, is that it can be a way for us to learn about humanity and a reflection of society. So what do you think Appalachian folklore tells us in that regard? And what do you think we can learn about that perspective from Old Gods of Appalachia?
There's in a lot of our folklore, and you can see it immediately, like in Jack Tales, for example. There tends to be a lot of themes of getting one over on rich people. If you think Jack and the Beanstalk as an example, what's going on there? Climbing a beanstalk to steal shit from a rich giant. That's what's going on. But that's it's a really common theme of, playing tricks, using trickery to, to get money, to get whatever, to get the things you need when you don't have the money, when you can't just do it. And I think those sorts of stories are as popular as they are in Appalachia because it is a region where there's a lot of poverty and a lot of people coming up with coming up with schemes to get what they need and figuring it out. And I think that is something that I have always noticed about our folklore and the things that are popular here, the things that really resonate with people. Because a lot of these are oral stories. These are the stories passed down for generations. And that's something that I think has been interesting. Is like I think you can really see the cleverness and the ingenuity of the common people reflected in a lot of those stories.
Anyone else? Oh. And Sam, did you get any questions on YouTube? If so, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, but I also figured this out.
Oh, okay, cool. The way that your story is told is you almost feel like you can see it happening, right? Have you guys ever had a TV show offer? And if so, would you guys ever consider making an Old Gods TV show or something like that? Something with Hollywood or whatever? Okay.
I think I can tell you that we have received an offer that did not come to fruition. It's a very hard thing because we are very concerned because we care, as I think is clear, about how Appalachia is portrayed in the media. We're very skeptical and very concerned about how someone else might interpret our show. And so we would consider it, but it would have to be the right deal and the right people and the right time for Steve and I to be able to dedicate a level of involvement to it, to help ensure that it's respectful. And we have had offers where we didn't have that confidence, and so we ended up walking away. So it's never say never. It's a possibility, but it would just have to be right. It'd have to be the right situation.
Sam, do you want to go ahead and do one of the YouTube ones, and then I'll come. Marissa, I know you had another one. Okay, let's do the piggyback first, and then we'll do.
Okay, if a TV show or movie was to happen, I gotta know, who would your fan cast for Jack be?
Oh man, are you kidding? What's his name? Walter Goggins. I think would make a perfect Jack.
One of the viewers wants to know, what are some of the sources you all use to gather information about local legends, myths, and haunts?
We get this one a lot. We grew up hearing these stories. Like when we write a story, we don't sit down and go through a book and say, what could we use? That's just not our writing process. But we highly recommend the Foxfire books. Those are a great source of local folklore and legends and things of that nature. But in terms of our writing process, we don't sit down and research it. Typically that's not how we work. It's all in the old brain from long ago.
Another question is, are there any spoilers from this last successful RPG expansion Kickstarter you could share?
Nope, sure can't.
And another person.
And one reason is, you guys have to understand, it's not written. Like, that's the whole point of doing a crowdfunding campaign, is to make sure that there is enough interest to support it. And so, like, yeah, no, we don't, word one does not get written unless it's funded. So, actually, no. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see. Like, we don't know. They haven't even, you know, brought stuff to us yet. So, like, I'm not just teasing you. Like, I literally cannot. I don't have anything. I don't know anything yet.
And someone else asked if the show is still happening in Boone on the 25th.
You guys, I can't answer those questions at this time. The show in Boone is very likely going to be postponed, obviously. But here's the thing, because we get asked questions about, is this show happening? Is that show happening? When's the tour? Blah, blah, blah. We can't answer those questions because there are agreements in place with venues that govern exactly when both they and we can announce things. So, like, I can't tell you. Those are questions, like, I literally cannot answer. We can't answer. So, like, if you email us and you don't get those sorts of things and you don't get an answer, this is why. It's because there's a contract in place. We can't do that.
Anybody else have a last? Oh, awesome.
With Baker's Gap, was it just a general location in Johnson County, or is it specifically Mountain City or Neva?
It's a general location. Is a general location. It is that's a town that's just like we just made up out of our heads.
Any final questions? Well, let's give Cam another big round of applause. That was so interesting. We've loved having you here, and maybe we'll have you back in a couple of seasons to learn more. But before you go, I just wanted to tell you about a few of the upcoming events at the museum and our next speaker sessions. Our next month's speaker session is on Tuesday, November 12th at 7 p.m., and we have bootmaker Lisa Sorrell here, and she'll be doing a talk on From the Saddle to the Stage, Country Music and the Evolution of Cowboy Boots. She is an amazing, creative bootmaker. I really highly recommend you Google her online. She is amazing, and we're very excited that she's going to be here in person from Oklahoma. Saturday, October 12th at 2 to 5 p.m., we have our Old Time Jam with ETSU Old Time Music Program. That's free here at the museum. Thursday, October 17th at 7 p.m., we have Songwriters in the Round, a program in partnership with the Crooked Road that features songwriters Linda and David Lay, Sandy Shortridge, and Rafe Van Hoy. That is one of our rare ticketed events. And then Saturday, October 19th, at 1 p.m., we have a rescreening of The Library That Dolly Built. We screened that on October 4th. It was very good. I cried a little bit. Highly recommend it. That is also a free program, but we encourage donations of 3rd to 5th grade level books that will then be given to the Appalachian Literacy Initiative to distribute amongst children in our community. And then finally, on Saturday, October 26th, all day long, we have our annual Community Day. That's free admission to the museum all day long and family-friendly activities between 10:30 and 1:30 and a bluegrass jam in the afternoon. So you are sure to have something fun and cool to do if you come by the museum that day. As a reminder, if you do want to leave a monetary donation, the donation jar is there to the right of me, and those donations will be going to local vetted organization dealing with Hurricane Helene relief. Thank you again for being here with us, both in person and virtually, and thank you again, Cam. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope everyone's a little bit creeped out. I'm not done. Stop. Sam, give me more. Okay. They have merchandise outside for Old Gods of Appalachia. Get your merch there and learn more, maybe learn a few more things from Cam as you're leaving.
Just can't get up and run. And as I lay there breathless, the next thing I expect was a blast of hell from Homer Lawson's gun.